This video gives more detailed explanation of each of the reports in the Preventive Maintenance module. YouTube now allows us to break movies into sections. So if there is a specific report you would like to view, please look in the description below for the video timeline so that you can jump to the report that you would like to see. Open the report builder by clicking on Reports and Printing. The first report we have is Current Record Preventive Maintenance. This just displays the record that you were on when you open the report builder. So if you're looking to print up a certain record, just go to Find PM ID, locate that record ID, and then just come here and open this, click Current Record. For Current Record, there are no additional filters or criteria to put in because we've already decided it's just the current record. Just click Print Preview to view. The layout of the preventive maintenance detailed reports for work to do, current record, work to do, future is all the same. You'll have your information about the catalog drop downs here so you know what piece of equipment or item it is this PM is for, the current status, the ID, the last completed date, the next due date, or in this case it's hours, miles, cycles, so we'll be waiting for the next reading, who it's assigned to, or if it was assigned to a title craft, and if there's a specific shift. The info about the PM, and then the action lines would go here. Also, if you put in information about people, number of hours and time, that would be here. Here is reading information. If your company needs to have hard copies of PMs once they're done, then your workers could sign here the completed by date at new reading and stuff. If you selected parts to be required, they would be listed here, and then there's room for you to write additional information as well. The next report we have is Work to Do Now, Due, Overdue, Urgent. This report is going to go through the PM database and find any PMs that became due today or might still be outstanding from yesterday or the day before, or week or month. Any PM that has not been completed that was due at some point today or before. Now, you can filter here to different categories in your catalog. You can use the quick pick or the drop downs. We can also have additional filters if you were looking for work that was just assigned to a certain person. Say someone was on vacation, you might want to pull up their PMs so that you can reassign them to somebody else. Different drop downs here, or you could search for a word or phrase below in either the PM info, action, or note field, and that would pull up just those PMs. You can sort the report by catalog, next due date, who it's assigned to, and title craft. This report has a detail view and a summary view. The detail view is going to give you one PM on its own sheet of paper so that they can be handed out to individual people. The summary is just a 3-line brief description of each PM. It doesn't have all the detailed information. So first, let's look at the detailed output. We hit Preview Print. In the detailed view, just like on Current Record, at the top, in this case, we have how many records are on the report. So this means in our database, we have 5 PMs that are due, overdue, or urgent. You have your catalog information, the status, the ID, when it was last completed, when it was next due, the frequency, assigned to information, info about the PM, and then the action steps to do. In this case, this PM had the people as 30 minutes for a half man hour. That was estimated time. Again, if you have hard copies your company needs of PMs, they could sign here so you can keep it. And then we would also have here additional space to write notes, use parts, things like that. For the summary view, we would click Summary, Preview to Print. For the summary view of the Work to Do Now report, we have at the top telling us how many records are on this report. We have 5. Then in the left column, we have the PM ID. We have your catalog information here, the top row telling us what it's for. Then in the second row, we're going to have what it is in the PM info that was in the brackets as a tag or a title, telling us just the first line what it is if you want to call that PM something. We have the frequency, and if it's assigned to a specific shift, the current status, who it would be assigned to or a craft title, and then what the most recent due date or mileage was. The next report we have is work to do future next to become due dates. What this report does is it looks for the next occurrence of a PM that would be due. This is basically so that you could just look into the future and say, hey, for a piece of equipment, when's the next PM due for this? It'll just give you the single next occurrence of that report for those PMs. The filters on this report are your catalog drop-downs, dates, because you may want a certain date range in the future. You may want to know what's coming due next month or next week in the future. Again, drop downs for assigned to, frequency, and tags for info, action, note. Again, you can sort the report by catalog, next due date, assigned to, or craft and title. This report also has two outputs: detail, a single PM on each page, and summary, just a 3-line brief description of what each PM is with the info in the PM info phrase. Let's first look at the detail view. The detail view of the work to do future report at the top will tell us how many PMs are on this report. In this case, there's 8 records. The catalog information, status, the ID, when completed, next due date, frequency, assigned to information, info about the PM, the action steps, if you put estimated time per PM, and how many people need it done. If it's based on hours, miles, cycles, there'd be information here. If you need to have hard copies of these PMs, then you could have your workers sign here. There's information here that you could write down stuff about parts as well as other blank space just for general information. To see the summary view, we click Summary, Preview to Print. For the summary view of this report, we still see the same 8 records, but now we're only seeing a brief description. So all the information that you're going to see in this case is on one page. You have your PM IDs in the far left. At the top row, you would have your catalog information. The second row would show if you have any titles in your PM info by using the first line in square brackets. That would show up there as the title for your PMs. The frequency and shift information, the current status of that PM, and who it's assigned to, and what the due date was or will be in the future. The next report we have on the drop-down is work to do future, all becoming due between dates. This is probably the report you would want to use if you were looking to get all the PMs due in a date range. The difference is the first one is just going to show the next occurrence of a PM. This will give you all occurrences of the PM in that date range. For example, you had a PM that was once a week and you put in a date range of a month, it's going to print a PM up for each week of the month that that PM is due. This particular report has your catalog filters, your date ranges that you can choose from, additional filters for assignment and frequency, as well as tag information for looking for keywords in the info, action, or note fields. Sort the report by catalog, next due date, assigned to, title, craft. This report has a detail view with each PM on its own page, and summary view, just a 3-line description. First, let's look at the detail view. The detail view of the PM, in this case, shows 959 records because we pulled out for a full 2 years into the future on our small database here. So lots of PMs. The breakdown is our catalog information here, our status, PM ID, when it was completed, and the projected due date for this PM. Again, if this was, say, a 1-month range and we had this PM that was once a week, then we would have a PM for each week of that particular month. Our assigned to information, info about the PM, the action steps to do, man-hour projections, and if it was based on hours, miles, cycles, you'd have your completed next due readings. If you need hard copies of your PMs, then your people would sign here and date, and that way you can keep it. Also, there's space here to write down parts used and other space just to write any general comments and that you might want to put in the database when you complete them. Now let's look at the summary view, the 3-line for this same report. It's just now, instead of each PM being on its own page in full detail, we only have a 3-line description of what each PM is in summary view. We have the PM IDs. In this case, it was once a day, so you can see we have one that's being printed for the 27th, 28th, 29th, so forth. Your catalog information across the top, PM info here, your frequency, status, assigned to information, and the projected due dates for the future. The next few reports are going to be important for auditing and compliance, as well as your internal use. The next PM on our drop-down is called PM List, and you'll notice over here that in the second column, we have some different agencies that are good for audits and that a lot of times people use ISO, Joint Commission, FDA, OSHA, SQF, different auditing agencies. These are the reports you're going to use for your audits, and in this order. The first one is PM List. What this report does is it's going to show all of the PMs for each item in the catalog where you have PMs, but they'll be grouped by that piece of equipment. That way, if you had a database of thousands of PMs, you don't have to scroll through those thousands to find all of the PMs for that particular piece of equipment. You could filter here in the catalog to that piece of equipment, preview it, and it would instantly find just those PMs for that piece of equipment. In our case, let's not filter. We'll just use the whole catalog, preview print. This is the result of our catalog PM list for our small example database. The first PM we had was for the restrooms to daily clean, and so you could tell right there it's just PM ID 7. Next one here for this here particular CNC machine, we just had 1 PM every 2 weeks. Now we have for different PMs for our Ford F-150, we have 4 different PMs for different frequencies, different items they need to be done. Here we have a different vehicle and we just have 2 PMs for that. Obviously your report is going to be a lot longer than this one. This is just a small sample database. If you're doing audits, this will be the first report you pull up because an auditor is going to want to know what you're doing at your facility to keep things up to such high standards that you're looking to attain. So this will be the first report you'll show them saying, here's our PM list of what we do. Then your auditor is going to randomly select some PMs here from this list and say, I would like to see the history on certain PMs here. So that takes us to our next report. The next report on our list is history, completion history for a single PM. So here's where we can put in an individual PM or select from our drop-down an individual PM, and we'll be able to pull up the history of completions for that particular PM. So you would select your PM. If you wanted all dates and completions, you could just select all dates. Or if you were just looking, say, for the last 6 months or 1 year, you could put in a date range for that. Just click Preview Print. And now we have a history of all the completions for this particular PM. We've done 3 completions. It tells us here our PM ID, our catalog drop-down, so we know which item this is. In this case, it's our CNC. And it says the first time this PM was completed, the status was urgent. We put down that Brad completed it. The second and third time the PM was completed, it said okay. That meant it was actually completed before the next due date, but we didn't put down who did the work. For auditing and compliance, when you complete a PM, you're going to want to have names in there so that it verifies who did the work. The date of the completion, the frequency, and the date recorded. The next report on our list is History PM Compliance. As we showed on our last report, sometimes PMs are done when they're overdue or urgent, or maybe they haven't even been done for a certain period of time. Our compliance report is going to show us this, and this is probably the most important report for the auditing and for yourself internally, because it'll show you how the timeliness of your PM completions as well as the thoroughness. Have you actually been doing them? So we would select our report, We could either just look for one PM, but generally you're looking for groups of PMs between a date, things like that. Again, we have a detailed report. That's just going to give us the information of each PM and its completion history for every date, when it was due, when it wasn't. And then we also have the summary, which we'll look at first because that just gives us the totals of what we had here. So make your filters, hit preview. And for our history compliance now it's broke down to show us how many PMs we did when it was okay, how many were due, how many were overdue, how many were urgent, and the total of all of those, and the percentage. Now, if there's PMs that are hours, miles, or cycles, they would show up here and then give you the grand total of all the PMs, hours, miles, cycles, as well as calendar here, and the percentage of each done. The bottom part of the report shows how many unique PM IDs were involved with this here report. And this shows the estimate number of PMs that should have been completed. And then that gives us an estimated percentage. So in this case, we did 22 PMs, but the program calculated that we should have done 40 during this time period. So we're only working at 55% efficiency here for PM completions. Now, if we wanted to break this down, we would go look at our detailed view of this report. So we would close this, come back and select Detail, click Preview Print. Now for the detailed view, this is breaking down for each PM that was involved here in the date range. It'll show the catalog, the PM IDs, the info. Now it's going to show us what the due dates should have been and when it was actually completed, the status at completion, the frequency, completed by, and notes. And then for this PM, it's given us a total saying that, hey, we actually only had 0 due dates, but we did 3 completions. So that's why it's showing up division by 0. But our next PM, here it shows each of the due dates, when we completed it, the status at completion, the frequency, and who completed the PMs. When we go to the next page now, we can see more information for this same PM. Now here we have 21 static due dates, and we actually did 18 completions. So for this particular PM, we were at 81, almost 82%. And for our final report, we're at 6% on this one here. So this report is great in detail to go back and look and see what PM or what time frame, why it is that you might be behind on certain PM. In this case, they're just not being done. So that's really affecting the estimated completion ratio, things like that. So this new compliance report that we came out with in 2020 is really enhanced now. It gives a lot of detailed information for auditors to help make your job easier to explain why things are or aren't being done. The next report we have is the History PM Compliance KPI, which stands for Key Performance Indicators. This is a report that auditors have started asking for in the last few years about key performance indicators. So we've developed a report for that. This report comes in both detail and an Excel bar chart graph. The detail view is just going to show you your different catalog information, how many PMs were done when they were okay and due and overdue and urgent, the breakdowns, the numbers, and in the end, give us totals of each of these here key performance indicators. Again, if you'd like to see this in a graph, then you would click the Excel option and it would show you a bar chart showing at what levels each of those was. Now, while the last report was for history, now we're going to look for current. Same as the other report, but what we're looking for in this report for an auditor is right now, how many PMs do you have that are overdue and urgent? We'd have our detail view showing us our catalog information, the different PMs that would either be overdue or urgent, and the totals. This report also has an Excel bar graph so that you could see visually that same information. Our next report is History PMs Completed Between Dates. This report is just that. It's going to show the history of what PMs were done in a certain date range. A lot of times auditors might say, I want to know what PMs you completed in a certain department in the last 30 days or 60 days, or maybe everywhere. So you would just select from your catalog drop-downs what it is you want the report for, the date range you're looking for, any other filters that you'd want to apply, and then just hit Preview Print. And then we just have a history of all of the PMs that met that criteria. Again, just a summary giving you the PM ID, the catalog drop-down information, what the PM's title was if you had those put in there, the status of what it was, when it was completed, and the date, the frequency, and who it was assigned to. Our next report is the cost and hours, PMs, and logs. This report by name shows PMs and logs. If you only wanted the results to show for PMs only, you would just check this. If you uncheck it, it'll show the PMs and logs. This is the same report you pull up over in the maintenance request and logs, only there you have the option to remove the logs or the PMs and only see logs. But other than that, the results are the same for the report. It's just in one case you might want PMs only, the other one you might want logs only. Just select any catalog filters you'd like to use, the date range, and maybe you wanted to filter it to just a certain person. But this report is great for internal use to be able to show you each item in the catalog, all the work tickets that were done for it, whether they were PMs or logs, the ID number, the date. If you have the titles in there, then you would have columns here for the PMs. You would have your cost, part, and hours if you're filling that information out. And same thing with logs, cost, parts, hours. And in the case of logs, you can track downtime if you like to. Then we have totals. Over at the end, it would give you the total for that particular ticket. When you're done with all of the tickets for that item, you would have a catalog total of it showing you for that particular piece of equipment. Now here we didn't have any information. Let's come down here to where we're in room 201. We had a couple of light bulbs burned out, so we had different logs for it, and we had a cost in the log column of $10 each time for a grand total of $20. We have a total here of just over a quarter of an hour and just under a quarter of an hour, so roughly a half hour total, and we had 7 hours total downtime and a $20 total cost. If you use parts, it'll show the part number here, and it'll show in the cost column here, it'll give you that value as well. When you go to the end of the report, it'll give you the grand total of all the catalog totals, showing you what it was for PMs and logs. This is a great report for you internally to be able to see where your money is going, your labor is going, your parts, and so forth, so that you can see where your bottlenecks are, or maybe a piece of equipment that is taking all your time and resources might be time to just replace that one. So a very powerful report. The next report we have is labor hours. Again, this can be broke down to PMs only. You would just select your catalog, what it's for, the date range, and here we could filter it to just one person that it was completed by. Maybe you're looking to see how much work Sarah had spent last month working on your PMs, so you could filter to that. And we have a detail and summary view. In our detail view, we've broke down, we had some PMs and logs that we didn't have a name entered for, so they weren't assigned to anybody, they were just general maintenance. And it shows the PM ID, the log ID, the date of the ticket, again, the title. And in these cases, we didn't put down much for hours and costs and downtimes, just on a couple tickets. We have Bob only did one thing for us, Brad did two. We had a couple things where just G user did. And then we had Susan Smith with a number of tickets, and on hers, we tracked some of her hours and stuff. And then finally, at the end of the report, we would have grand totals, so that way you could see what your labor hours were for PMs, logs, how much downtime you had. And our next report is all PMs. This is where you can start with the entire PM database and just filter to a certain item, using your catalog, or we could look through the whole database, and we can look for just certain things. Maybe you want to have a search to find out any PMs that have the word thermostat in them, or that have the tag ISO, because maybe you have an ISO audit coming up next week. So you put tags in there for all your PMs that are related to ISO. This way you could pull up all of those ISO PMs so you could check the status and see if they're all up to date, if everything's current, or if there's any that need special attention before the audit. This report also comes in detail and summary view. First, we'll look at the detail. The detail shows your catalog drop-downs, the status, the ID, when it was completed, next due date, frequency, assigned to information, PM info, action, estimated man hours, readings. If you need hard copies, they can sign here. Space to put in parts used, as well as other space that you could write other information for. The summary view just gives us a brief description, same exact PMs, but we're not getting all the information, just a quick overview. Our PM ID, our catalog stuff, our PM information field, the frequency, the status, assigned to information, and the different due dates. The final report we have is the projected PM cost. This report, if you're using the PM parts required and you've put in the estimated number of people and hours and cost, we can pull up a report to project those values into the future. So we select the projected PM cost report. We could filter to certain catalog items, or we could do a date range, and then we would hit preview print. The detail view of this report is going to show each of the individual instances of when that PM would be due, the cost, and what's involved. And then it would go through each PM, listing each of the items, each of the parts that might be used, and so forth, so you can see the full detail of what's needed. And then at the very end of the report, we would have the totals saying, here's what we're going to need for our costs that we put in, our part costs, our labor hours, giving us a grand total. And then it will also list whatever the parts are that we said we needed. So that way you could order all of the parts at one time for that particular date range in the future.